You and your therapist have this, what I would call discovery metaphor. So you want to discover how you got to be so messed up. And you've been doing it for years and years, and you think you have some ideas, but somehow that doesn't end up changing you. I've tried to operate from a different perspective. My metaphor is what I would call a creation metaphor.
Wow!
You are listening to the Bold Business Podcast, where you will hear firsthand experiences about what it really takes to ensure market relevance and your company's future.
Welcome to the Bold Business Podcast. I'm your host, Jess Dewell. Today we delve into the story of Charlie Bresler, whose leap from psychology professor to business leader and philanthropist showcases the power of pragmatic choices over passion. Charlie's commitment to values and practical action has propelled him to make a lasting difference both in business and in aiding those in extreme poverty. Charlie, welcome to the Bold Business Podcast.
Thank you for having me as a guest.
Once upon a time, before you were the president of a very large organization, you were a psychology professor. When you were teaching and working with students and thinking about people and their behaviors and the way things, the way we interact with each other, did you ever think you would be doing that?
No, absolutely not. I had no idea whatsoever that I would ever end up in business. I was somebody that had never thought about business, never taken a business course, was not particularly interested in any aspect of business.
When you went down the road to be a psychology professor, study psychology and people, what is that passion that drove you and drew you to that?
I'm not sure I would just use the word passion in that context. I don't know that passion has ever driven me, to use that metaphor, anywhere outside of my family. Maybe a few close friends over the years, maybe my participation in the anti-war movement when I was in university. But I do not think that passion drove me into psychology or into business. And to be clear, passion didn't even drive me into philanthropy. So as we talk about that story, I don't mean to come across as if somebody who's not passionate. I think I'm extremely passionate, but I think it's limited to a specific interpersonal sphere and not so much to my career.
When I think of passion, I actually think of something slightly fuzzier, something that makes my heart get really excited. Some people might say, light your pants on fire, whatever it might be to make you move forward.
I assume that's what you meant, and I still stick by my answer.
Can you give us more of a definition? I like that. I would love for you to explain more because I'm still trying to grasp the way you're defining it as not only as a difference, but I'm very curious because I actually may be less passionate the way that I think also, now that you say it.
To me, passion it is when you love somebody or care deeply about somebody, or you care deeply about a cause, like I did in university about overcoming American imperialism in the Vietnam War, or the way I feel now about many things going on in the world. I would say I'm passionate about seeing change, but I don't see it as my capability of creating that change. And so it's a more abstract type of passion. But when it comes to my career, as opposed to those other things that I was mentioning, I think I've been driven by pragmatism more than passion. I have to go back a little bit further. I graduated from university in 1971 at the height of the Vietnam anti-war movement, and I was thinking a lot about how I could make a contribution to ending the war in Vietnam as one small individual. And apart from going to demonstrations, giving talks, I thought, maybe if I go to graduate school and study history and teach secondary school, I could have some impact on how adolescents evolve and think about the world. And so I went to graduate school, got my master's in history and education, and taught secondary school for 3 years. And it was more of an intellectual decision about how to make an impact. I didn't feel passionate, to use your term, about teaching or education per se. But I did feel, to use your term, passionate about some of the messages that I wanted to try to get across in my teaching. I did that for 3 years and found that I wasn't having the kind of impact that I wanted to have. the war in Vietnam came to an end somewhere between 1973 and 1975, depending how you measure it. So I was at a loss at that point what to do. I wasn't very materialistic. So thinking about a career that would give me a lot of money or even a fair amount of money didn't really matter to me. I decided to pursue my interest in tennis, and I managed a tennis club and played a lot of tournament tennis and got to be pretty good by New England standards. And that was what I did for 7 years. But during that time, I found I had to make some money. And so I was able to arrange a job as a psych tech where I could carry a pager and go in and do interviews of people who are acutely psychotic to help determine whether they should be hospitalized or not. I won't get into the details of how I came to feel qualified or be viewed to be qualified to do that, but I did that. So I did that for a long time. And then another pragmatic decision came along. My wife got into medical school. My wife and I have been together since high school. And I decided, I think I have a strong enough ego to be hanging around a bunch of doctors who tend to be arrogant and be a mediocre tennis pro / psych tech. So I decided, again, pragmatically, to go and get my PhD in social and clinical psychology. Because I thought practically that would be a good thing to do. It would solve my ego problem, and it would also put me in a position to get a different type of job. So I went to graduate school to do that, and I developed this very strong, positive relationship with my dissertation director. And I had 3 fabulous years at Clark University in Worcester, which is noted for its psychology and geography, but not a lot else. It happens to be the one place that Freud and Jung came to talk when they came to the United States. Not that I was interested in Freud or Jung per se, nor was anybody at Clark at that point. But anyway, I had a great education. I enjoyed my time there. I also had a lot of fun. And when I was finishing, my wife was also finishing her residency, and we were trying to figure out what we wanted to do. And I decided I wanted to live in California. Diana was fine with going to California. She liked New England too. So I said, she got a job teaching at a family practice residency in Fresno, California, and I got a job as director of behavioral medicine. But the decision was really driven by the desire to live in California and much less by, I have to teach psychology in a graduate school. That's going to be the really exciting thing to do.
That's actually how I make decisions in my life. And I would have never said I can be pragmatic about some things, but I would have never called myself pragmatic. And I'm listening to it. We wanted to live in the Pacific Northwest. So what did we do? We figured out how to come here.
So I got that job. Diana got a job, and I taught graduate school 7 years. I started an anxiety and stress disorders clinic that treated people with agoraphobia and obsessive compulsive disorder. And even the way I fell into doing that work and writing the grant to get that clinic going was a bit odd. Diana had a patient, a Hmong woman, a Laotian, not Laotian, but Hmong from Laos, who could not take care of her children because she had become agoraphobic, and Diana had no place to send her. And even though she knew I really wasn't interested in doing clinical work, this is the theme again of pragmatism, she said, would you see this woman? And I said, gee, Diana, I don't know anything about treating agoraphobia, and I'm not really interested in doing clinical work. My mother was in a mental institution most of the time I was growing up, so I had really not a lot of interest at that time in talking to people about their psychological problems. I know it sounds odd, even though I was a psychology professor, but I taught a different type of psychology. Anyway, be that as it may, I went to see this woman, and she came to see me at the school, and her name was Song. And I read all I could read about how to treat agoraphobia, developed a treatment program for her, and within 3 weeks, she was better. She could take care of her kids. She could leave the house, just like the research showed would happen with certain people. And then Diana referred another person to me, and she got better. And I said, oh man, I'm on a roll, because my experience with people were they languished in therapy like my sister or in a mental institution like my mother, and they didn't really get better. So I got excited about that. Maybe that's close to passion. And when the time came to start to write a grant for the college, the university that I was teaching at, I decided to try to start an anxiety and stress disorder clinic, which is ironic because I hadn't been interested in anything other than research and teaching. And so I got the grant and we started the clinic and we started treating people with OCD and agoraphobia. And it was interesting. I did that for 7 years, teaching and had the clinic.
If you are ready to make a real impact in your business and you've waited too long to take action, go to reddirection.com and click on Solutions to find out how.
Something happened. There was some action. Sometimes it was an ask. Sometimes it was like the next step because there was an interest in that moment. And then planning occurred. And then adjustments were made. And then the next thing to do seemed to make itself known. I say it and it sounds super easy. Looking back, do you see those transitions as also easy?
Yeah, they weren't difficult for me. I have a very supportive relationship with my wife. And we're really focused on our children, enjoying our life. And nothing I did seemed in those days difficult. I'm a privileged person. I'm white. I'm male. I was born in the United States, not in a country that has a lot of extreme poverty or illnesses people die of that they don't need to be dying of. Yes, I was unfortunate that I had a couple of pretty crazy parents, but for the most part, I've just been privileged all my life. And yes, things have been easy, I have to say. And I have to remember, there's a line in The Great Gatsby, the first page of The Great Gatsby, where the main character, Nick Carraway, says, my mother always used to tell me that I had to remember that not everyone in life had the same privileges that I've had. And I spent a lot of my last 10 years focused on those people who don't have those privileges. And I was aware that people didn't have those privileges. But things have been relatively easy for me.
Yes, it was easy. And the way you described it, it almost felt natural.
It did. And it didn't feel risky. There are times later on where there's some risk involved, but it didn't seem risky.
Did you have kids at this point, or was this pre-kid?
We had one child when we moved to Fresno, and soon after we had our second child.
So even though it didn't feel risky, there was risk involved in your family. You were moving your family around.
My wife is a family doctor, so she could always make a living. So it wasn't like we were going to be out on the street.
Are those the same pillars from then and the story you've just been sharing with us then to today in your relationship with your wife? Has that grown? Has that changed? What does that look and feel like today to have that support and partnership?
I guess it's grown just by time. It feels every bit as good as it did back then. But I also have the addition of 2 grown children and 4 grandchildren. So the pillars have grown. So it went from one other person now to, in addition to Diana, to 6 other people, plus my son and daughter's partners. So that makes it 8. So it's really extended. But the obligations have extended too. I have a lot of obligations to my grandchildren who are attached to us to take care of them and to nurture them and to repeat being a parent. So the pillars are more, but the responsibility has also grown.
You read a book and then reached out to the person who wrote this book.
I didn't go from being a graduate professor in Fresno to living in the Pacific Northwest, starting the Life You Can Say It with Peter Singer.
So here's the thread that I am following. The relationship, ideas that could become opportunities or not, and the choices to take those opportunities or not. And then, yes, I skipped over a lot of experience and a lot of other things because I feel like when we're talking about partnership, when we're talking about privilege and helping people with less privilege, when we're talking about making change and something that we're passionate about, even though we're also pragmatic about it sometimes, or most of the time, and the passion comes in the way that it can, there is the life you can save. And was that also something that came out of the pillars of your obligation, the actions that came along and the planning that happened and the new opportunities that were acted on so that more planning could happen along the way?
The Life You Can Save grew out of my longstanding desire to help people who are living much less privileged lives. And that stems back to my university days, as I suggested. Not only my efforts in the anti-war movement, but the little bit I did in the civil rights movement as well. So I've always been interested in inequality. And so when I read Peter Singer's book, following this business career, that gave me both the financial wherewithal as well as the freedom to do something to help people living in extreme poverty, I took the opportunity to do it, and read the book, was catalyzed by it. Wasn't an epiphany, but I found it catalytic. And I wrote, and I reached a period in my life where I didn't feel, and Diane and I both felt like I didn't need to earn any more money, which was part of that privilege, and that we could use some of the money that we had made, inadvertently almost, if I track back to the business story, to start this nonprofit that would support people living in extreme poverty. I took that opportunity to follow your theme or your question. Did it seem risky? It seemed like it might not succeed, but it didn't seem like a personal risk, because Diana and I are not particularly materialistic. So giving away the money didn't seem risky. We still lived really well. And trying to put my efforts into building the life you can save didn't seem risky either. But it did seem more close to passion than either my graduate career or my career at the Men's Warehouse. Much more close to passion, I would say.
Looking back, hindsight being 2020, do you think that all of the experiences and the choices that were made in your household, as well as for you, in each action that you were taking, in each role that you had, do you think that consciously or unconsciously you were waiting for this to appear?
I'm not one of these people that believes that everything happens for a reason, or that there's some sort of destiny. Peter Singer says to me sometimes, the reason that I was in business for so long, in spite of my values that would suggest I wouldn't have been in business, was because I was earning to give. I wanted to earn enough money that I could give money away, but I actually wasn't conscious of that. I was conscious of earning money so I could live well, support my family, maybe even someday have money for my grandchildren. It wasn't like I became fabulously wealthy by today's standards, but I became much better off than we ever expected to or cared to be. No, it didn't seem like I was waiting for it to happen. But when it did happen and it became clear that I could do something about it, I think I acted in a very strong way. And I took an opportunity that many people might not have taken. So in that sense, I was quick to act.
Something that's important to you is getting to know the stranger inside yourself. Where did that come from?
So that's the theme you're taking from my podcast, Musings About Ourselves and Other Strangers.
Yes. Yes.
It's pretty superficial in the sense that I'm not looking, unlike my sister, for example, who was in therapy for 20 years before she died of an accidental overdose. I'm not looking at the causes or the distal causes of why I am the way I am. I'm looking at what my values are and how I can become a person that can look in the mirror and say, I'm living closer to those values. And so my soul searching, if you, is admitting to myself when I'm far away from living those values and trying to explore how I can get closer to living those values and be more like the person I want my grandchildren and children to remember, as opposed to really looking at, oh, my mother was so ill and this led me to this and this led me to, I don't do introspection like that, but I do a lot of introspection on how I can try to become a better person, starting on the assumption that I'm not a really good person and try to get better all the time. Like I was with my tennis. To make a stupid analogy, I had a really terrible backhand when I started playing tournament tennis, and I worked on it a lot. And I got better and better. Then I had to worry about my forehand because it wasn't as good as my backhand anymore. But so it's that kind of, I don't know what you would call it, superficial analysis or present analysis that I'm engaged in a lot.
Maybe you are or know a company that is looking for support to double their revenues to $3 million, $10 million, or $25 million. Jess Dewell will roll up her sleeves to quickly understand your growth strategy and assess how you work with uncertainty, how much stamina is being used to make decisions, and how your current priorities align to your long-term growth goals. You can schedule a complimentary consultation to find out more at reddirection.com. And now, back to the program.
From what we've talked about so far, it does seem that another theme that is showing up is when we act with the knowledge of exactly where we're at, we get to make a choice. And it sounds like the goal, the hope in some instances, is that we make that next choice and start acting someplace close to our values.
Correct. And that we live a life where intention is really important, where we don't just drift, but we have some fair amount of intentionality about what kind of impact we want to make, what kind of relationships we want to make, what kind of grandparent we want to be, what kind of friend we want to be, what kind of global citizen we want to be, that there's a lot of intentionality about that. And then how much energy we want to put into our own personal development, our health and wellness kind of goals, like physical well-being, etc.
You're catching this and making these great distinctions to be intentional, to understand and to have something that's right here, right now for us to be able to have this conversation that our listeners and anybody that is going to be coming along and our listeners and our watchers will be like, okay, am I being intentional enough is what I'm hoping is coming across with my little revelation right here. We can be introspective and reflective in a way that supports why we are the way we are, or why we want to do something next, or just to go do something next.
Yeah, it is that. It's much more the last two than the first one. I remember years ago, my sister asked me, and she was really struggling, as your listeners can imagine based upon what I've said. Charlie, why is it that you turned out to be happy and have such a nice life, if you will, and I turned out to be really struggling? And I said, to me, this is my simplistic answer, Mimi. That was her name, Miriam. Same name as my granddaughter, I might say. So I said, Mimi, because that was her nickname. I think it's this. I don't know. I think what's happened is you've been in therapy forever. And you and your therapist have this, what I would call discovery metaphor. So you want to discover how you got to be so messed up. And you've been doing it for years and years, and you think you have some ideas, but somehow that doesn't end up changing you. I've tried to operate from a different perspective, even though it's not like I haven't struggled. Believe me, I've struggled. But my metaphor is what I would call a creation metaphor, which is, okay, what kind of life do I want to have, and how do I build that life? One is a discovery metaphor, which is intrinsic. I don't want to get too much into psychological theory, but which is intrinsic to various psychological theories and therapies. My metaphor, like the one I use with Song and some of my other clients over the years, is, okay, you want to get out of the house. Let's talk about how you can get out of the house, not how you got to the point where you became agoraphobic.
So it's movement to action always. Movement to action.
Sensibly within the range of the person's capabilities. I might have asked myself, how can I get to be a top 10 tennis player in the world, which was a desire of mine. But I couldn't have done it. I didn't have the physical ability to do it. So that your intentionality, your goals have to be in keeping with not your perceived limitations, but your actual limitations.
How do we get real and accept our actual limitations?
Most people go too far and they actually think they're more limited than they are. There are people like Donald Trump who are the opposite, but they're few and far between, I think. I think most people limit themselves more than they need to limit themselves. I interviewed somebody today on a podcast, without getting into the name of my podcast, and the person super, super intelligent. And I was worried before the podcast, would I do well with interviewing this individual? A lot of people I've interviewed on my podcast are very smart. But I was particularly concerned about this particular guest. And I realized after the interview and after talking to him, Charlie, you're a lot smarter than you think you are. And I think that my limitation has been me limiting myself, not being grandiose and think I could do anything.
Are there other times in your life, maybe during the time when you wanted to make change and you were studying and became a high school teacher, to when you moved into the realm of writing grants and opening clinics, to when you were in actually the business world, to even today around that, your own limiting beliefs in other places that people clued you in, and you were observant and open enough to receive?
So the one that really comes to mind first is Amy Cedarbaum. Amy Cedarbaum was a girl in 10th grade that I really wanted to ask out on a date. She was my sister's best friend's sister. Now, most of your listeners may not think about this girl that they wanted to ask out, or the girl in 10th grade, but anyway, I really wanted to ask her out. I remember how incredibly nervous I was before I picked up the phone. I can still visualize myself sitting there trying to pick up the phone and being almost paralyzed. And I think there are probably other men, and I say men because in my day and age, it was the man who always had to do this, not the woman so much. Now I watch movies and it's usually the woman who seems to be more the aggressor, not the man. But in that day and age, it was the man, or the boy in this case. And anyway, finally I picked up the phone and I got Amy on the phone and I asked her if she wanted to go to, I can't remember what it was. I think that far back my memory doesn't go. And she said she couldn't. And I remember being extremely deflated. But then she called me back 20 minutes later and told me that she got out of the thing she was supposed to do and that she could go out. And that was a big victory. So yes, there have been a number of times in my life where I sold myself short, and other people, the world, other things have told me, Charlie, you're really more capable in this domain. The best way to do that is to actually achieve in a specific domain and then realize that you can do it. But sometimes people just sharing with you that you can do it is good enough. The one I've been struggling with my entire life is intellectual capabilities. My wife was this most successful girl in our high class, went to Harvard. I was like in the middle of our high school class. Of course, I never brought any books home. My mother was institutionalized. I was depressed. But it took years for me to realize a variety of test scores and experiences like going to graduate school and going to Harvard myself that got me to realize, well, you're probably smarter than you think you are. But for me, that was the particular stumbling block. And I got over the Amy Cedarbaum thing after a while. So yeah, there have been times in my life where I felt way like I've sold myself short, wondering if there are you didn't ask me this question, are there times where I actually thought I could do things that I couldn't do?
Where do you think I was going next? You took the question right out of my mouth. Yeah, let's go there too.
I probably thought, because of my parents' success in business, which was this meteoric rise in this public company, I probably thought I was better at business than I am. And I think I probably had an inflated view of and still do in some sense, of my business knowledge. That would be one area that I can think of that's an important area. I don't know, we'd have to ask my grandchildren as to whether or not I have an inflated sense of my ability as a grandfather, or my wife as whether I have one as a husband. But the one that stands out to me most right now is that I think I'm not as good at business as my career path would indicate. And maybe I believe my own press a little bit too much and still do. That would be one that comes to mind. So that means that everybody who's listening to your podcast should not invite me to be on their board or consult with their business.
Oh, I tell you what, that's interesting. So I felt it coming up when we were talking about partnership and when we were talking about the way that you and your wife made decisions for your household that impacted where you lived, impacted what opportunities there were to work, how your kids might be raised, what that meant for the work, the impact that you would have on the work. And then we were moving into this concept of staying aligned with our values. and taking intentional action and being really intentional about it. Has that come naturally and at some point you have been able to articulate it? Or was there some pivot, turning point in your life that you were like, I don't know if I've been doing this, but I really want to and need to right now?
Yeah, I knew that I wasn't living my values relative to making a social impact the entire time I was in business. From the day I started to the day I went into the CEO's office and resigned. And I lived with that dissonance, and I was bought off by the money I was making, the security I was gaining for my family, and the status I was getting, being well received by other people, being treated like I was important, actually doing things well. I mean, I talked about some of my deficits in business. I didn't talk specifically, but there were many things I did do extremely well and got rewarded for, not only in terms of promotion, but other people's appreciation and support. And I got an email from somebody a week ago from their son of somebody who recently died, who was a salesperson manager in one of our stores in Florida, told me just how much his relationship with me had meant to him. And I've gotten those kinds of things from time to time. And I got more of that when I was actually in the business. So those things were important to me and sustained me, but I knew all along I wasn't really living a value-based life. I may have been a progressive retail executive, but the bar for progressive in retail is extremely low. So it didn't take very much to jump over that bar. So yeah, that was a time when I knew I wasn't doing it. But as I got to be older, even older, I was realizing I was reaching the point where I needed to do something or I would never do it. And I think combined with the fact that Diane and I had enough money to meet our material desires and what we wanted to do for our children, because I think that was an important piece of it. And again, I don't want your audience to get the idea that we're like really rich, but we're very comfortable. Then at that point, I decided, you know what, I'm going to, and this is a risk. This is a time I took a risk, a big risk. I went into George's office, and he was the CEO, the guy in television. Some of your viewers may remember George. And I went into his office and I said, George, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm resigning as president, and I don't want to be your successor as CEO, even though I was in line to be the successor. And I want to do something else that's more in keeping with my values. That was a big deal. It was a pretty big deal with the board too, because I was the obvious succession plan. Anyway, we worked through that. And that was the period where I decided once and for all I was going to do something more in keeping with my core values, apart from family values.
Focused on growth? Listen to more programs like this which support the challenges and opportunities you are working with right now. Come on! Search Bold Business Podcast for the key terms at reddirection.com or your preferred podcast listening app.
What distinction do you make between your values and family values?
The family values are the values actualized within my family. The other values are the ones actualized within or not in society. I always think I've lived my values with my family, but I don't think I've done as well with society.
Do you have a set of family values or values that fit into your family? So this is a little bit broader than either of those groups that everybody just knows within your family?
I think Diane and I share that being a good global citizen has always been a part of that, even though I wasn't necessarily living that. I think my kids at different stages of their life, when they could understand what that meant, knew that. I think being respectful of people, not being racist or sexist, valuing education has been another one of those core values within our family. Having fun, which is a value of mine, and being safe, which I think permeates a lot of my thinking and my family's thinking, which is make sure you don't do things that are too dangerous. And that's been passed on to my grandchildren, to my children. So I think they're I have a 5-year-old granddaughter and a 3-year-old granddaughter, and I think both of them are very conscious of being safe, physically safe, and hopefully my other 2 grandchildren will have that. So those are some of the core values in our family. Being generous. Generous is another.
Our house rules, our values are a little different. They fall into this, but our house rules start out, number 1, be safe. Number 2, be kind. Number 3, have fun. In that order.
Doing well in school was always really important to me and Diana, having our kids do well in school. And my son once said to me that I fooled him into thinking that it was really important to do well in school. My son is an organic vegetable farmer who went to an elite university. And his view is that was a waste of his effort to get in, waste of his effort to be there. So he thinks that I fooled him because it turned out not to be that important. That he'd just been learning farming from the time he was 11 years old or 10 years old. He'd be far better off.
Interesting. Isn't that interesting? We never know what the times will bring, and we never know when we're going to have to go there. So maybe he's right. Maybe he's not. You never know. I know I still have a lot of things I say to my parents. Why did I have to be like this? Why did I have to be like that? Someday, they may prove me right. But someday, I may prove them wrong. You never know. Isn't that funny? It's just through action and choices. The stories my dad told and my experience with my dad growing up, I was like, okay, if my child is even half like this, I want to avoid unnecessary interruptions like emergency rooms. That would be great.
It's ironic because my son chose one of the most dangerous professions there is, which is farmer.
It is. And hey, but he's got a good background, doesn't he?
We'll see.
Can we be a global citizen in our own communities?
I believe you have to be, but I also believe that our community is a lot bigger than people think. If you think of the pandemic, how big is your community? It's the whole entire world. If you think of the internet, it's the whole entire world. If you think of climate change, it's the whole entire world. So I strongly believe that people need to be good within their own community, starting with their families and spreading out and their local community. But I also think they need to consider the possibility that children living in sub-Saharan Africa who are dying of illnesses that nobody in the United States will die of, like diarrhea, malaria, that they're in your community too. And so extending your belief of supporting your community, I'd like to see much broader than how people currently think when they think it all begins at home. Charity begins at home. I believe it starts there, but it shouldn't end there.
To build on that actually goes back to a limiting belief we might accidentally have placed on ourselves in society that maybe it's time for us to be breaking through, is what I'm hearing you say.
Before my parents were like completely out of it, I was raised to be an internationalist. My parents were internationalists. And so for me, it was really easy. For other people, not so easy. Patriotism, U.S. first, it's ingrained. And that's true in people in other countries, Australians and Brits and French, etc. I'm always thinking that as I've done this work at The Life You Can Save and realized that we can so easily impact the lives of people in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. For example, for $50, we can give a child sight by removing their cataracts. Whereas in the United States, it would cost $40,000 to train a guide dog to just help somebody for 7 years with blindness. We could actually cure blindness for $50,000. And I could go on with the litany of incredibly high impact interventions. And that's why I say, as we donate our money or our time, we should consider broadening, because we can solve some of these problems in a world where most of us feel pretty helpless, as you and I spoke about before we got on the interview. We feel pretty helpless a lot to be able to solve problems, and that's realistic. We have a really limited ability to solve some of the global problems, like what we see going on in Palestine, Israel, Gaza, but we have a tremendous ability to solve some problems. Homelessness in our own communities by increasing how governments spend money to help people who are homeless, to provide affordable housing, all the way through providing bed nets and malaria treatment and treatment for children who are sick in sub-Saharan Africa. And my suggestion is we need to consider being generous across the board.
Do you get to travel?
I could travel, but I haven't been traveling to sub-Saharan Africa. I've been in India a couple of times, sub-Saharan Africa. I really should, but I haven't for a variety of reasons, some of which are not good reasons. But I speak with people who are living in those places, view the videos of people who are living in those places, and I have colleagues, many colleagues who are living in those places. And what I find exciting is that there's so much opportunity to do good there because there's so much improvement that can be done for such a little amount of money. And it isn't a matter of turning these communities into Seattle or Bellingham or New York or whatever. It's a matter of improving the living conditions in the communities as they are.
Things that we have mastered that are like our normal being in the country that we live in the United States, we can replicate for a small investment compared to a large investment.
Like hydration therapy, which can cure a kid of diarrhea, is practically free. And even in the United States, it's not that expensive. You can get outpatient hydration therapy or Pedialyte, but a lot of these various interventions are very inexpensive. But generally, they haven't been used in the developing world. But there's improvement, and we can help create more improvement. And that's what I've been focused on in the last 10 years.
You said the book was a catalyst. Was it because it was, I don't have to worry about making sure people have clothes. I'm actually helping people institute technology or advancement or bringing in medicine or whatever it might be. I'm thinking about this and I'm thinking about all the conversations I've had about people who think they know about what's actually happening. And I don't claim to in any sense of the word. I am undereducated in this area. And so I would be curious, is this book about that particular thing, the amount that we can take just a little bit of money and make a huge difference for many people? Or is it about something else?
Peter is an ethicist, so a lot of it has to do with the ethical obligation to help. Yeah, but a lot of it is how easy it is to help and giving examples of that. The book is available, by the way, on our website for free. We have an ebook, which is available for free. And we have a celebrity-read audiobook where you can listen to celebrities read chapters from the book that's available for free.
What is your goal?
I think our goal is to increase the amount of money we raise for our recommended nonprofits by at least 20% per year, compounded. And our goal is also to distribute more of the books, The Life You Can Save, and related material like videos. So that's the goal for The Life You Can Save. I once said to somebody, this was years ago, I was sitting in a kind of upscale cafe in New York, Midtown, with another person who worked in philanthropy. I said, if you went in here and you asked how many people have heard of Peter Singer, you just went around to all the tables. Other than the two of us, it might be one person. This is Midtown Manhattan, okay? But I would like to think that 10 to 15 years from now, 20% of the people would have heard of Peter Singer. So that's another way of expressing that goal. Personally, my goal is to continue to try to find a way to help people who are living in extreme poverty to be a really good grandfather and husband and father, and to stay healthy. Because I think when you're 74 years old, that's an important part of the goal. Because you can't do those other things if you're done.
I want to know what makes it bold. What makes it bold to pause and reflect on how we're showing up in the world so that we can intentionally make the next choice and take action on it?
Bringing to awareness something that maybe you know, but that maybe we think of as tacit knowledge. You know it, but you're not always thinking about it. But it relates to a move that could be really beneficial to yourself and others, but really bringing it to awareness and being able to live with dissonance or discrepancy between what you're doing and what it would mean that you're doing if you were to make that move. And living with that long enough that you go, you know what, I can do this. I think that's what makes it bold.
Jess hosts the Bold Business Podcast to provide insights for building a resilient, profitable business by deeply understanding your growth strategy, ensuring market relevance and your company's future. It is bold to deeply understand your growth strategy with your host, Jess Dewell. Get more information about how to drive solutions and reset your growth mindset at reddirection.com. Thank you for joining us, and special thanks to our post-production team at The Scott Treatment.